flying the real thing is going to be different. But how do I explain that to someone who will hopefully in the future have that experience, but maybe have not had that experience just yet? It's like trying to explain to somebody who's never tasted a banana how a banana tastes. You know, it's a fruit, it's sweet, but where do you go beyond that? All right, so 1 year ago, I flew in Saab Gripen over in Sweden. This was my first fast jet experience. Hopefully there will be many more, who knows? But it was my first, and it was absolutely sensational, of course. But it was also very different to what I expected. So I want to talk about those things a bit in this video, talk about the process of, preparing for the flight, and then having the flight, and then what came after as well. And have that sort of as a 1 year anniversary of, processing and decompressing the experience, going through this step by step. And if we're doing this step by step, we'll start with the preparation for it. Now, how do you prepare for a fast jet experience? I didn't know. I just didn't know. So basically it boils down to this, of course. Are you doing this experience for fun, or are you doing this experience to learn something and have fun at the same time? And for me, it was definitely the latter. I started with sort of the obvious things a bit. It's like, oh yeah, fighter jets, they have to be fit, right? They have to be physically in good shape. So I started doing a little bit more sports before that, ramping up in the months before that. I did a little bit more exercise. I wasn't in bad physical shape, but I wasn't also in peak physical shape, definitely not. I was just in good all-round average physical shape, but the medical sort of confirmed that as well. So yeah. At the same time, I did the ridiculous thing of practicing what to do with, G-loads. Well, it's ridiculous if you think about me sitting in my room watching videos again of like fighter pilots going through their training of, clenching their butt cheeks and tightening their legs and dropping their shoulders and having that, breathing very forcefully. It sounds ridiculous. I did that in my room a couple of times, trying to sort of prepare for it. Turns out that preparation was a little bit overkill. Most planes are G-locked if they have a fuel tank on them. So, the big bags that you see with the extra gas that's in there for the aircraft to fly. And we had one of those on. So I think we were G-locked at 7 Gs or something. And I think we pushed it up to 6 at some point. Which, interesting, G-forces, the way I experienced G-forces was not the way I thought I would experience. Beyond that, again, completely overkill. I went into simulators and I did a little bit more BCM, ACM, trying to figure out, okay, so getting my bearings again with the controls. And I think I was doing the DCS F-16 module, which of course is completely different to the Saab Gripen, but it was just sort of getting that repetition and that hand to eye coordination and so on down. Completely unnecessary, but it's what you do when you don't really know what else to prepare for. And then, of course, I also revised the technical side of things. So what engine does it have? Okay, fair enough, this is the power it puts out. What's the, how many hard points? What's the weight of the machine, and so on and so forth. Turns out, as I said, many of these things that I did in preparation actually didn't matter. Or maybe they did. Maybe that's the basis that you need to then sort of go to other topics and go beyond sort of the technical side, the physical side, and sort of start to understand how it is for a pilot to operate these machines. And one of the other things that I did in the preparation, this is the only thing that I think really came through in an active sense, is learn a little bit about what is important in a cockpit for the pilot. The HMI, the human machine interface. How is data processed on a fighter jet? How is that data then also shown to the pilot? How do they maintain situational awareness? Not what is just going on around them, with the good old Mark 1 eyeball looking out left, right, and center, but also beyond that, beyond the horizon, first of all with the radar picture, and then of course also the data they're getting from other enablers there. So that's what I looked at as well, and that's, I think, also in the final video that I produced, you saw me taking that preparation work and then transferring it over to the Gripen flight that I had. That was really interesting. Okay, that was the preparation. I then go to Sweden and I meet the pilot that I'm going to be flying with, and it's Andre Bulan Brandström. And that was a big honor because this was a really well-known Gripen pilot. He won the best solo jet display in Riyadh 2023. And he's also already a star on YouTube with his flight displays of going like from -3 Gs to +9 Gs with those flight displays. I think a lot of fighter jet pilots who have YouTube channels have also either had interviews with him or have discussed his flight. And yeah, that was really cool to, you know, meet somebody like that in the flesh. And fighter pilots are just cool people. They're really calm, been there, done that sort of people.
That's true, yeah. Oh, a fighter pilot. Well, a pretend one.
They're the perfect person you could ask for, taking you up in a fast jet for the first time. Now, Bulan also runs the pre-flight briefing for me, where there are no surprises. You know, it's a general outline of what we're going to do during the flight, what maneuvers we're going to fly, what the protocol is. Like once I get stick time, he's going to say, you have control, I have to respond, I have control, and then I have indeed control over the fast jet, and what to do in an emergency. Nothing fancy there. It's all sort of standard. And I'm feeling good at this point. I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling comfortable. You know, I've got my flight suit on. I'm starting to get kitted out. And you just get this feeling of, yeah, something's going to happen, and you just feel cool. I mean, you're in a fighter jet pilot uniform. You feel cool. And they make you feel so at ease as well. It's really brilliant. However, at this point in time, you know, breakfast was a couple of hours ago, and I was presented with a sandwich. And I knew I should refuse that sandwich. And initially I did refuse that sandwich, but we're in Sweden, and Swedes are really, really accommodating and really, really nice people. And they're just like, well, you know, if in any case you do want to have the sandwich, it'll be right here. And it's like, okay. And then we were sitting in that room, and that sandwich was looking at me for about 20 minutes. I was like, a little bite can't hurt.
It was at this moment that he knew. He f***ed up.
So I had about a quarter of the sandwich, just, you know, to get something in the stomach. That was a mistake. I'm getting to that. Okay, so we're getting ready for takeoff, and I'm feeling good. Still, I'm feeling good. You know, I'm just about to have this experience. I want to enjoy it to the fullest, but also learn from it. I'm just pumped. And I think there's even video footage of me, like we're you know, starting our taxi, and you just see me in the cockpit going, yeah. I was feeling good. And then there's takeoff. I kid you not, takeoff woke me up. During takeoff, I knew I was in something that was completely different to what I thought it was. You know, fair enough. Gripen, small, compact fighter jet. Very powerful, but it's small. 23,000 pounds of weight for takeoff, roughly. We went into full AB for takeoff, 18,000 pounds of thrust. It just, you know, it kicks you. And in that moment you realize, oh, yeah, this thing has some power. And that's really immediate. And I've been struggling to find sort of the notes in order to explain this, yeah? Because obviously flying the real thing is going to be different. But how do I explain that to someone who will hopefully in the future have that experience, but maybe have not had that experience just yet? It's like trying to explain to somebody who's never tasted a banana how a banana tastes. You know, it's a fruit, it's sweet, but where do you go beyond that? Really, the only way I can explain it is the mind and body has to realign with a different set of reality. So there's the obvious thing, there's the sensation of flight. You're moving in a 3D environment. That's completely different to at home when you're flying a simulator. Duh. But how different is that? It's the small, imperceptible, but also the perceptible changes in how everything works, how you're moving in a space, how you're feeling the acceleration, how you're feeling the maneuvers, how you can't just, you know, you cannot just press escape, get up, go and get a glass of water and come back. Again, very obvious. Once you're experiencing it, you realize that this is a completely different can of worms. You're strapped in. You have somewhat limited mobility. It's not too bad, but you know, you're meant to be in one position and have easy access to all the controls, the lever, the knobs, and so on. You have to control. But beyond that, you are still strapped in, and you're just going along for a ride. And all these movements that you're making, they do take some effort. You don't realize it at first, but it starts to compound over the flight, and you're starting to get physically tired. And you're starting to sweat, but at the same time, it's not too warm. You know, the air conditioning works. You have, and this was really weird, you have the oxygen mask, and once you go to altitude and you start breathing the oxygen, it almost tastes fake. It really does. It's hard to explain how breathing oxygen, basically what happens on these fighter jets a lot of the times is there's basically liquid oxygen that is being transferred into breathable oxygen. They generate their own oxygen. But it somehow tastes fake. I wouldn't say it tastes metallic or plasticky, but there's something off about it. And it's not that it's unpleasant, but it's also definitely not pleasant. And then the G-forces, you're starting to pull G-forces very quickly. In fact, when I had my stick time, when I started, just doing the slightest things on the control stick, because we're going so fast, we were pulling Gs very, very quickly. And for me, the transition from 1 to 2 Gs actually felt a lot worse than going from 3 to 5 Gs. 3 to 5 Gs, that felt relatively comfortable. I mean, the suit blows up and then sort of, you're getting pressed in your seat. But because the suit at that point, once you go beyond 2G, it has maybe sort of fully activated and blown up and is starting to take the load off you, or attempting to do so, more so than maybe by the transition of 1 to 2 Gs. Maybe that's the reason. I don't quite know. But as I was saying, mentally and physically, you're starting to feel as the flight continues that a lot of things are happening here that your body is just not used to. And this results in a surprising amount of confusion and trying to, your mind is trying to scramble and attach to things that it knows, and then trying to go from there and build a coherent understanding of what is going on around you. So as I look at the cockpit and as we're going through the flight and as Bulan is talking to me and explaining things, we went through a little bit of air-to-air combat stuff. We went through a little bit of what Gripen can do, about how it makes it easy to fly and so on and so forth. I'm relearning the cockpit. I have sat in a Gripen cockpit multiple times. I've sat in Gripen simulators multiple times. I know this cockpit. I know the displays. I know what they can do. I know what they show. And I'm looking at them and I'm just like, okay, so yeah, that's my map. That's my map. These are my flight instruments, okay? And this is additional information right there. If I look over there, I'll find my throttle. If I have my stick here. So maybe some of the revision that I did before the flight of trying to, go through what Gripen is, where everything is in the cockpit and so on, was in fact helpful, because without of that, I would have probably been lost. When I got stick time, flying was really easy. Flying is not the problem. I felt supremely comfortable with Gripen. In fact, I would say that flying Gripen was a lot easier than some of the light aircraft that I have experience with. It was easy. It was just do this and it goes into a smooth bank. And then, I start pulling a bit. G's build up, but, we're going into that turn. Rolls, barrel rolls, easy. So smooth. It's smoother than in a simulator. Honestly, it just feels perfect. And once you have a machine that does everything so crisply, so cleanly, the first thing that came to my mind is like, am I missing something? Is there something wrong here? This cannot be as good, but it is that good. And that's why somewhere during the flight, it may click for me how important it is for pilots to be able to focus both body and mind on the mission and on decision making rather than flying the machine. And we see this as we go through the history of aviation. World War II, engine automation comes in, and that takes a lot of load off pilots having to manage their engine while in a dogfight. And then we go into Cold War and more sophisticated machines are added. You need a second crew member in order to manage all of this. And you have so many knobs and levers and switches. And you look at these cockpits and you're just like, how can anybody learn this stuff? But they did. But then equally, all of those systems were miniaturized and their controls were automized, where instead of doing 5 or 6 inputs that are required by the pilot manually, maybe there's only one that's required, and so on. And that's the transformation that happened inside the cockpit over the duration of many, many decades now in the cockpit to get to the point where we are now, where there's very few switches and control inputs required for the pilot, at least in Western jets, in order for the machine to do certain tasks automatically for them, while of course the human has the oversight. And that really did, you know, that flicked the switch in me. It's like, okay, now I understand, first of all, that I didn't know anything about cockpits and how pilots actually work in a machine before that. I thought I knew some stuff. No. It's a very humbling experience going through that for 1 hour in a fast jet, having somebody very experienced talk you through in a very calm voice of what they're doing, of very simple things, and you go trying to wrap your mind around how that is actually done in practice. But equally, as you're going through that experience, you're starting to then reattach to things that you know, and you're starting to put it into a picture. And now I know a little bit more than I knew before. I still don't know much. I will say I came out of that fast jet experience with more questions than I had answers. I'll go through some of the questions later on. The mental and physical load on the pilot. Obviously, if you're somebody who has like 100 flight hours a year, who maintains the currency with the platform, things seem relatively straightforward. But if you're being put into the situation, you know, there's only so much you can absorb mentally and physically. And as I was in the cockpit, there was actually an interesting conversation I had with a pilot a couple of days, I think, before that. And that pilot said some very pertinent thing that I recognized when I was in that cockpit. And that is that we need to understand that the human is the bottleneck, not the machine. Now, the human can do many things. And in fact, the reason why we build up pilots the way we do over a relatively long period, from basic flight training over to, well, eventually combat ready, then qualified FCQ, flight lead, weapons instructor, never mind where you want to take your career as a fighter pilot, you know, that takes years, decades even. And that makes sense now, because yeah, you need to have a specific person that is able to do so. And it's not so much about what they can do physically, but really what they can do mentally. How they see the battle space, how they can understand what is going on, how they understand the movements in the air, how they can cooperate and with not just their wingman and a foreship, but also assets that are further out, that are in completely different locations, and how they interact with each other. Must require really a mind that is able to almost think in a 4D chess environment, rather than just like, oh, here I go, you know, guns blazing, World War II style Knights of the Air.
And you're sitting here playing chess with a computer.
That is true.
Mr. Spock, you're the most cold-blooded man I've ever known.
I've just won my 4th game.
And as all of these things are coming at me, and I'm starting to compress them into sort of mental bullet points, I was doing pretty well for the first sort of 30 minutes. But as I was saying, that fatigue starts to compound. And then we go to low level. We fly over this beautiful Swedish lake, frozen of course, at very high speeds. I think we're 300 feet. They can go lower, you know, the Gripen pilots can go lower. They're practiced to fly lower as well. But for us, we were limited at 300 feet. And the pilot was like, hey, I'll show you how maneuverable we are. So he snaps the plane from the left to the right. Immediately, my brain is like, oh no, that was bad. And then my stomach was like, yeah, I agree, that was bad. So, so we're flying this, and he's talking to me, and I'm trying to be like, okay, get it together, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I have conversation with him, and eventually I'm just like, hey, do you mind leveling out a bit? Just keep it nice and steady. And he knows what's coming. Wulan knows what's coming. And this is very common apparently on people who have their first experience, but whatever. I get my bag. I do the deed. I shouldn't have had that sandwich. And then I don't know what, but I was like, oh no, there's another half an hour ahead of me. And then something else in my mind was like, you know what, you're experiencing something that is so rare, you have to make the most of it, even if it happens again. So somewhere in my mind, I'm just like, okay, whatever, let's go. So I put on the back the mask, I'm like, I'm good, let's go.
And I'm back. Ah, good.
That sandwich. Never again. Never again. I'm actually pretty good. I mean, I say that after explaining to you that I had moments of weaknesses in a jet, but I'm actually pretty good with vertical. I don't get dizzy that quickly. I do well on boats. I do well on aircraft. I do well on buses. it was just, I think, a coming together of fatigue and that sandwich. So that's interesting. It's part of the experience. The other thing I would say, though, as I was, sort of describing, us flying off the countryside, how absolutely beautiful it is to be in a machine that feels almost limitless in power. We at one point we broke through the clouds, and Bulan puts it into a 90-degree climb, and I just look around. I'm just like, I'm a rocket. I'm literally Rocketman right now, just going. And we're going, and we're going, and we're going. And I look at the altimeter, and it's going up, it's going up, it's going up, and it's going up, and it's not stopping. And we keep, we're at speed. We're just in full AB. Like, just the amount of power that is in these machines is absolutely sensational. It's probably one of the images that is most stuck in my mind from the flight. It's both that low level, which was beautiful, by the way, really fast over the lakes, and then that absolute monumental climb 90 degrees up, and looking at the world as you're like leaving it behind, and just a blanket of clouds curving away from you. Anyway, we land, and I'm feeling great. There's some stuff happens after the flight. There's like a post-flight briefing, there's a get-together of people, you have a chat about the flight and so on, and they make you feel very welcome and good about what you've done, and they ask you about your experience, and they want to know how you perceived it. And putting words to it is really difficult at that point. But then eventually I go back to the hotel, and I just start writing notes. And all these mental bullet points that I have, I try to put them into one coherent format. And what I come up with is, basically you need to fight for time. That's what I put in my video back then. So you need to be able to give the pilot the ability to gain time, to make decisions, and not having to deal with whatever is going on around him, with switches, knobs, whether it's the actual interface with the plane or with busy work that occupies their mind and them in other ways. But you need to really be able to give them the benefit of automating as many systems as possible, so that they can just think, make decisions, and take the plane where it's supposed to go, and then enact their mission and go from there. And obviously that requires a very clean presentation of the flight instruments. That's why a lot of Western planes and other planes as well are going, of course, from sort of this analog displays to digital displays. This is long in the making. It's already in most fighter jets anyway. Some of you may have seen the interview I did with the F-35 pilot, also with the Gripen pilot for Gripen Echo model. And it just shows how important that clean presentation is, and now, of course, also how important it is to process all that data that the plane gathers, but that is also sent to the plane by enablers or other sensor platforms. And that information management and that processing power is really required in order to take the pilot to the next level. Because while I said earlier that the pilot or the human is the bottleneck, what we should also recognize is that the human can do things that the machine cannot do. At least not yet, and maybe never will. And that is, a human that has training and has experience will possess a level of intuition, as well as an ability to interpret situations, events, happenings, being able to much more than sort of the clean processing, the ones and the zeros of a machine, to operate in gray zones and to understand and to really act upon information in a completely different manner than a machine does. And it's that intuition, that gut feeling, if you want to call it that way, and having that in a trained, experienced human being, and putting that person at the controls over machines that automates or even autonomously does certain things in order to support that human, can take fighter pilots to places where they haven't been before. And that's why we're actually living in a very exciting time period now of development, technical development, and transition over to this new world where a lot of the technology that we've taken out of the Cold War era, at least in the West, is being adapted to the 21st century and allows pilots to not just be fighter pilots who mainly now operate at distances, beyond visual horizon engagements, but also be primary decision makers, managing that battle space rather than being simply a chess piece on it, which is really interesting. Now, I mentioned earlier that I have questions now. I have a lot of questions. In fact, I have a lot of questions here that I have for future flights. So if there's any other company or Air Force out there who would like to take me up and produce some snazzy YouTube videos and explain topics that aren't explored that often, and in fact, through that way also show deterrence to certain adversaries that the West is facing, I have some questions. And the basic thing is, of course, how does all of this work, not just in one aircraft, but cooperatively with your wingman in a 2-ship, in a 4-ship? How do pilots and really the commanders that lead these 4 ships and maybe even larger formations, how do they work with the burden of distance? How do they plan around their flight paths? How do they use BVR weapon engagements or within visual range battle engagements? How do they plan around that, the employment of those weapons for a diverse range of targets? And that's just air to air. How do you position and use your fighters in an environment where radar reigns supreme in order to have advantageous positions in engagements? How do you operate in a swing role? How do you go from air to air to ground and maybe then back to air? Who knows? How does all of this work on the human body with fatigue and sort of the mental burden that there is in longer engagements? So when you're on stations for many, many hours, being refueled by enablers, maybe once, maybe twice, depending on the plane that you're flying and what sort of fuel load it carries. How do reconnaissance pods and sort of tactical air power work? How do you interact with that? How do you go from your mission briefing over to being on station, over to then cooperating with, let's say, JTAC on the ground and then hitting that pickle switch? Be an extension of that, how do you do anti-shipping? And then how do you operate in an electromagnetically degraded environment where not all the data that you want to have is being gathered or is being shared to you, or you have to turn off certain systems in order to decrease the emissions of your platform? How do you have more complex mission sets then as well? So for example, with SEED, right? So how do you have a package that suppresses the enemy air defenses while another package comes in and does a certain mission in a certain environment? And how do they cooperate with each other? And how quickly do the SEED platforms respond to radar locks or radar being turned on the ground, radar locks, just somebody starting to ping the attacking package and so on and so forth? How do those interact? And we're operating in margins here where you have to make quick decisions and you have to make good decisions, and it's a whole big can of worms. And then actually beyond that, the big picture question, how do you sustain all of that and your jets, your humans were at high sortie rates? That has only just opened up for me. So like I said in the beginning, I think I said at the beginning, I now know how little I know. And it's exciting, because now I can go out there and find out more. And it's really cool. A big thank you here again to all the people at Saab. You know who you are. And of course, Bulan for this flight. It was an unforgettable experience and I appreciate it a lot. If you have any questions on this whole experience, put them down below. I'll try to answer them as much as possible. And since this is my first video on my new channel, Air Power 21st Century, subscribe if you want to see more about contemporary and, well, modern aviation. And yeah, I aim to take you to places. So as always, have a great day and see you in the sky.